Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Historic Marker Monday. I am Michelle with Fun in Key West, and every Monday we explore those historic markers that you see around Key West. And today is an interesting story. We're diving into tales of pirates, daring Navy battles, and the wild era of shipwreck salvage that actually shaped Key West's early history. So if you're watching us live, be sure to say hello. And so let us know if you've heard the stories or have checked out some of the places we're going to talk about. If you're listening to us on the podcast, thank you so much. Be sure to like this episode and tell everybody about this and what we're doing over here at Fun in Key West. So today, as I said, we're talking about pirates and Navy battles. And we're going to be talking about how all this shaped the history of Key West. And this comes from Commodore David Porter's Mosquito Fleet chasing down the original pirates of the Caribbean to the wreckers who turned disaster into a fortune. And this is a story I know you guys are not going to want to forget. Here's an interesting fact. Did you know that at one point, Key West was one of the wealthiest cities per capita in the entire United States? All thanks to shipwrecks. Yep, all thanks to shipwrecks. So buckle up, because this story has pirates, like I said, and treasure, and even a little bit of international scandal. So picture this. It's the 1820s, and the Florida Keys is a dangerous frontier. It is the Wild West of the Atlantic side. Spanish rule is fading, and the Caribbean is just crawling with pirates, or as they call themselves, the Brethren of the Coast. So these are the original pirates of the Caribbean. Merchant ships are easy prey. They're coming through. They don't move that fast. The pirates' ships move a lot faster. They're a little more nimble. They can sneak up on you. A lot like those movies that we were attached to. And there isn't a strong U.S. presence in this area, and so it was the Wild West of the sea, and the pirates ruled the sea at that time. But this all started to change in 1822, when the first U.S. flag was raised on Key West, or as it was known back then, Thompson's Island. And so on February 7th, 1822, Lieutenant Perry was ordered to survey the coast and inspect the Keys. And just weeks later, on March 25th, Commodore David Porter and his men planted that very first U.S. flag in Key West, staking America's claim to the island. Porter had a tough mission. First, he had to get rid of all those pirates, make the waters around Key West and the Florida Keys safe. But he also had to establish a naval base there on Thompson's Island or Key West. And so he had to stop all the terrorizing of those Caribbean pirates and open up the trade routes so that those merchant ships could very safely come through those waters. So how did he do this? Commander Porter assembled the West Indian Squadron. It was a collection of fast, nimble schooners that were perfect for chasing pirates. They could go into those hidden coves and those reefs and really track down those pirates. And these ships, they were fast, they were lethal, they were unpredictable. And so like a mosquito buzzing around the room, you just didn't know where they were or when they would show up or how they'd strike. And just like that, that's how they earned their nickname, the Mosquito Fleet. The fleet even included the Seagull, which was the very first steam-powered ship in the U.S. Navy. It was pretty cutting edge for 1822. So Porter now has his fleet, and they go to work, and they went to work hard. They patrolled relentlessly. They got rid of all of those pirates. They found their strongholds, and they intercepted the ships. And their piracy was effective in that the region, piracy vanished in a couple of years. That's how effective they were. One dramatic moment has Perry chasing down these pirates to a port in Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rico at that time was under Spanish rule. So the pirates escape off their ships. They go into Puerto Rico. And Perry's saying, I want the pirates back. I want to take them back and I want to punish them. And the Spanish officials refuse to hand over the pirates. So Perry decides, I'm going to go get him myself. And he has his crew just march ashore and try to take the pirates back. It was bold, it was gutsy, and it was a little too independent for the U.S. Navy's liking. So rather than having an international incident, the Navy court-martialed him. And then rather than Porter sticking around for the end of the court-martial and figuring out what his punishment was going to be, he resigns, and then he heads down and takes over and works with the Mexico Navy. Years later, the U.S. government decides, well, maybe we were a little rash, maybe, who knows, politically motivated probably, and they decide that they want to make amends with Commodore Porter. And so they make him the consular agent to Turkey. And he goes over to Turkey, and that's where he passes away in 1843. But here's where it gets interesting. So now that all of these pirates are gone and all of these shipping routes are now safer than they were, the pirates now, the shipping lanes have exploded because now all these merchants know the pirates are gone and we can safely navigate these waters. By the mid-1800s, you had over 100 ships a day pass through the waters. And on average, there was about one wreck a week that was occurring. So these same reefs that were being terrorized by the pirates now also were safer because there weren't any pirates, but they were just as dangerous because you had the reefs, you had the shallow waters, you had the unpredictable weather, and of course you had at least 50 wrecks a year. So enter the wreckers. The wreckers were the brave men who were licensed to go out onto the water when a ship wrecked, and they were able to take what was aboard those ships, bring it back to shore, auction it off, and keep the proceeds. There was a very intricate system that was set up for these wreckers. They had a tower that they could look for the wrecks. They also had, and I was talking to people about this, they had this system where the wreckers would go out on their boats or on their ships, and they were strategically positioned up and down the keys. And every morning they would go one direction until they saw another ship. And that meant there were no wrecks in that direction. If they went that far and they thought that the ship should be there and there wasn't a ship there, then it was like, oh, there must be a wreck. So they would continue on that direction. The wreckers were at their height from about the 1850s to the 1920s. The last wrecking license was actually issued in 1921. So now you may have heard the legend about wreckers using these false lights to entice the ships ashore so that they would wreck. You know, there's really no concrete evidence of that, although it's great lore to be talking about. And what's interesting, though, is there's some conversations had that although Perry and Commodore Porter were able to get rid of the pirates that were going around the waters of Key West and the Florida Keys, in stepped the next kind of pirate, which was the wreckers. But wrecking was so profitable that it turned Key West, like I said earlier, into one of the richest cities per capita in the entire United States by the mid-1800s. In 1856, the USS Isaac Alderton sank during a hurricane, and the salvaged cargo from that single ship was worth over $50,000 during that time. In today's dollars, that's about $1.9 million. It was a mind-blowing fortune back then. It would be a mind-blowing fortune today. But we see the wreckers decline. You had better navigation tools that come in, the lighthouses, the beacons, steamships become more maneuverable than some of the wind and the sail ships. And like I said, the last wrecking license was officially issued in 1921. What was interesting, though, and here's some interesting facts that I bet I found interesting, and I bet you will too. The Mosquito Fleet ships had fierce names. I mean, they're hunting down pirates. Their job is to clean up the waters around the Florida Keys. So these ships had names like the Ferret, Terrier, and Greyhound. Those are the names of ships that you want to be chasing down pirates, right? By law, keep in mind though, by law, wreckers had to save any sailors first and then salvage the cargo. So first was the safety and the rescuing of the sailors, and then came the cargo. Today, the Key West Shipwreck Museum sits at the site of a former warehouse owned by Asa Tift, who was one of the wealthiest wreckers of his time. And you can go through there and expand and look through all of the history of the wreckers, the history of that area, and you can climb up onto a replica of the tower. Up on top up there, I'm telling you guys, it is an amazing view. You'll just love it. I think the price of admission to get into the Shipwreck Museum is well worth just being able to walk to the top of that tower. So as you're walking through the streets of Key West, take a moment to imagine what it must have been like a couple hundred years ago. There was pirates lurking offshore. You had the Mosquito Fleet out there on the hunt. And then came the wreckers, and they were ready to spring into action. Like I said, there's history around every corner. You're going to see a plaque in Mallory Square that talks about the Mosquito Fleet. And right around the corner from there is the Wreckers Sculpture Memorial. Be sure to check that out because it does pay homage to the wreckers and what they did for the city of Key West. Also off of Mallory Square is the Bronze Sculpture Memorial. And over there is the busts or the heads of a lot of the founding people of Key West. I'm telling you, there's a lot of history in Key West. It's amazing, all of the connections of the stories that we heard and learned as we were growing up in school and how it all connects back to Key West. That's probably why when we come to Key West and you walk the streets, you're like, feels like home. It feels like I've been here before, right? Thank you so much for nerding out with me on another episode of Historic Marker Monday. You know how much I love to talk about the history of Key West. Do me a favor, if you loved this episode, like it, share it, let other people know about it. But more than that, head over to FunInKeyWest.com. I'm going to be updating some of the information over there. And I'm going to be putting in a map where you can find a lot of these historic markers. And I got a little bit of other things in the works that I'm working on. But there is a self-guided tour over there that talks about all of these historic markers. And like I said, if you are live, be sure to let me know because I'm going to give you a shout out. So Tim's saying, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Tim. Mary Elizabeth is saying, hi, good morning. And Anne is saying she's been through the museum. It's very cool. It is very cool. And it's not just a place if you're traveling with young people to go talk about do the museum tour. I think it's just a cool place just to go to the top and get the picture of the view. Like I said, head over to FunInKeyWest.com. Be sure to check out our historic marker tour there. We also have a whole list of things that you can check out. Free guides on where to eat, where to drink, and there's also a section there on our travel partners. Those travel partners that we work with, that we love, trust, and adore. And you can book your tour right there on our site. We have sunset tours, we have food tours, we have walking tours, we have it all over there. Be sure to go check that out. Also, check out our book club. I know there's so much to check out over there. I don't know why you guys don't go over there every day. But anyway, go check out our book club. Every month we have a book that focuses on some sort of connection to Key West and the Florida Keys. And this month is all about a smuggler's tale. And we are going to have the author live on our book club at the end of the month. So be sure to check out the information about that through our book club. I am Michelle. I am so glad you stopped by. Thank you for joining me. You guys have a great Monday, and we will talk to you later.